All right, folks, we are live and we are back with another episode of Palantir Deep Dives. This is episode number 6. Gonna be a really simple one today. We're gonna be reacting to an interview that Shyam Sankar did with Harry Stebbings of the 20 VC podcast. Now, I don't know if you know what this podcast is, but it's a pretty popular podcast out in Silicon Valley. Only has 2,000 views on YouTube, so I don't think a lot of people have seen it. And I'm going to be live for 45 minutes today. We're going to get through as much of it as we can, and then we'll finish the rest of it tomorrow. It's a pretty good interview, about an hour long. I'll be commenting throughout the video just on a bunch of different stuff that I find that's interesting. But overall, I wanted to go through it. The other reason, I thought it was really interesting is because Shyam talks a lot about Palantir's origins, particularly in the defense space. And obviously in the defense space, there's an article that came out today that I did a video on just in terms of how competitive it's getting in the defense space. Maybe that's not fully true. Maybe that is kind of fully true. Maybe the article just came out to tank the stock to, for people to pick up some more shares. But that is something I think we should be talking about. And I would love to hear what Shyam is actually thinking about the defense space and sort of how he conceptualizes defense technology right now. And this entire podcast is called The Broken Incentive Structure of How Governments Buy Defense. So he's obviously making an argument around the way governments procure software. So that's pretty much it. That's the deep dive today. We're just going to react to it. I'll be giving my thoughts in between, and we will finish this deep dive tomorrow. And then over the coming weeks, over the coming days, we'll do different episodes. Again, 8 p.m. every day. We're live for the deep dives, and Monday through Thursday. All right, here it is. I'll be with you watching this, and I'll be stopping it periodically to comment on certain things that I find interesting. Here we go. Shyam Sankar, Broken Incentive Structure of How Governments Buy Defense.
We have created so much process that we either have fair competition nor speed. The European process is even more slow because there's an even greater emphasis on how do I show fairness across all of the EU states. We are spending at historic lows relative to the Cold War.
What is it in context of GDP? 15%?
2 to 3%.
What was it in the Cold War?
At its peak, I think it's like...
Shyam, I'm so excited for this. Now, you were described to me by Joe Lonsdale as the hardest working person in Silicon Valley, and that's coming from Joe. So first, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, Harry.
Not at all, but I do want to start on that. I want to unpack just that work ethic a little bit. I think I'm a armchair psychologist. I think a lot's driven by childhood. Where do you think you get that work ethic and drive from?
I think it comes from my father. My father, as a young man in his 20s, he left India to set up the first pharmaceutical manufacturing facility in India, and I'd say in Africa, sorry. And even before that, he was the youngest of 9 children, and he lived in this structure where all of his siblings were working their ass off to send him to college. And this sense of, look, I have to make something of this, given all this opportunity I've been given. And he was a great man.
And so that inspired you that the only way to win was by working hard?
That there was kind of this obligation to family, to society, that there's just so much value in that. And I think in his life, in many ways, I think you could say it would be kind of a trivial story if it was like, look, my dad was this guy who worked really hard, he took this risk, and it all worked out. That's not what happened. It all didn't work out. When my dad went to Nigeria, when I was a young kid, we suffered horrible armed violence. He was almost executed. He had to start over. We fled Nigeria. We resettled in the US effectively as refugees, starting from scratch. And I was raised, and he lived his life with this deep understanding of the counterfactual, that no matter how bad it is, remember what it could have been. Your alternative to this present moment is being dead in a ditch, and how grateful you should be for that, and how you should not squander the opportunity that you have as a consequence of that.
Shyam has a blog, for those that don't know. I started reading it back in 2021 when I discovered Palantir. He's been writing since 2006. And this idea of hard work is a real big thing for him. I mean, people talk about work-life balance. He's religiously said on his blog that work-life balance is bullshit and you just have to work your ass off. So I didn't know Joe Lonsdale called him the most hardworking guy in Silicon Valley, but I believe that, quite frankly. And he's been really grateful for the opportunity he's gotten his whole life, because I did know about that Nigeria story with his dad. And I mean, when you almost escape death, you probably, just want to keep working hard.
How old were you when you had to restart?
I was 2.5. So fortunately, many of those 2.5, 3. I was not mentally scarred, traumatically scarred by that, but it had a profound effect on my parents.
Yeah. Can I ask, when you look back on your lessons from them and seeing them, how do you think it impacted you?
It really gave me this sense of looking forward. So like, look, all these bad things happen. What are you supposed to do about it? What the most productive thing you can do about it is stick together as a unit and focus on what you could do next, and support each other through that, and support each other's ambitions. I think accomplishing great things in the world very rarely can be done alone. At least I've never experienced that. It's really the unit. There's all these unsung heroes. It's better to think about it as a rock band, not a solo act. And getting that chemistry right is, I think, crucial. And it's as crucial at home as it is in business.
Can I ask you, have you seen General McRaven's commencement speech where he says about the importance of making your bed at the start of every day? And one of his is find someone to help you paddle. And it's very much along those lines. Can I ask, with that realization that bad things happen and it's about putting your next step forward, do you believe in luck? And how do you think about the importance of luck versus pure hard work in factoring towards success?
I kind of have a mixed feeling on it. On one end, I think it's not very, I'm not sure why it's productive to believe in luck, especially if you think your luck can vary, right? So, I mean, I think the most productive mind frame is something like, I have good luck, and the only thing I actually have control over is how hard I work. And so let me focus on that part of it. And how smart I work, sure. But I have the other view of it is there such a thing as luck? Probably. But it's like quantum. We often think it's like, what matters more, luck or hard work? Or it's like, why not both? And only one of these variables do you really have a lot of control over. So I think, we probably somehow in this current epoch, I think we've undervalued or underfocused on hard work and overemphasized the role of luck in success.
I don't.
Dude, someone that works hard would only people that work hard make that argument. Because, I mean, like when it comes to luck versus hard work, a lot of people make the argument that, like if you've ever listened to Guy Raz on How I Made This, I used to listen to that back in like 2022. And whenever that was his last question, how much is luck versus how much is like timing or whatever. Most people that are humble enough would be like, oh, it's luck. I worked hard, but like there was a lot of luck. Shyam was like, no, fuck that. You got to work your ass off. Like, don't even use luck as a mindset or as a framework psychologically to think about life. Just work hard. And that goes to tell you, someone who denies luck that much, who really is just adamantly thinks it's not a correct framework, that's someone who works their butt off and thinks that they deserve what they work for, which is, someone who probably works hard.
I don't think it's that actually. I think we've just overvalued the role of fake humility, which is like, I think a lot of us are happy to admit.
That's exactly what I just said, right? This concept of fake humility. Yep.
Ourselves. I worked my ass off and I got to where I am largely because of that. But you can't say, yeah, I worked my ass off and I deserve to be here. I think that's a tough thing. Can I ask you, how did Palantir come to be? Because you was like Zoom in the early days. This was like Kevin Hart and I think 2002, 2003 style. This was like dawn of like Silicon Valley greats.
Yeah. So for the audience, this is Zoom with an X, which was the money transfer company that subsequently ended up with PayPal. And that was great. Like I really got to the, maybe backing up a little bit, I got to the Valley because in this period of time, having graduated from Cornell, your opportunities as an engineer were really finance, consulting, or maybe a very large tech company where you were going to be a cog in the machine. Like Google didn't even come to the campus to recruit in those days. And so I just needed to get to Silicon Valley. I went to Stanford for that. Within 2 months of getting to Stanford, I had like begged and broken down Kevin Hart's door to get a job at Zoom. And that's really how this kind of all started. So I joined Zoom as the 5th employee and I spent 3 amazing and wonderful years there. But when I, through Joe's freshman year roommate, actually, I learned about Palantir, this very eclectic character, Gabe Rosen, who is a poet who swims at the South End Rowing Club in freezing cold San Francisco Bay waters. I mean, this guy you can't really put in a box, but he's like, you really need to meet Joe and hear about this company. And at the time, it was 12 people, and they wanted to work on problems of national security. My uncle was a victim of the 2006 coordinated train bombings in Bombay. I was very much, I was in upstate New York during 9/11. I think that was a seminal moment for many, many folks of my generation. I actually tried to drop out of school to join CIA, but I think everyone had that idea at that time. I didn't even have a college degree, so they didn't quite respond to my electronic application. And so, yeah, I would have much rather, failed, and it certainly seemed in 2005, Palantir like this, it wasn't at all clear how it was going to work, but I would have much rather failed working on something that I thought was so important.
What state was Palantir in?
Shyam is very relaxed in this interview. So shout out to Harry. He got him really comfortable and relaxed, and he's kind of letting loose in terms of just describing his life. Now, I think they're going to talk about the origins now of Palantir.
2005. Just help, because we see it today as this incredible company serving many different governments around the world. Where was it in 2005? Like, where was the entry point for you?
Really, they had focused on only hiring engineers. And of course, I'm an engineer by background, but I think they kind of figured out that they really wouldn't want my code in production. And so they were kind of at the point where there's like, okay, well, who's going to actually interact with the customers to shape how we're building the product? And we don't want some sort of product manager who's thinking, like, this is a very deep and complicated problem. The intersection of the domain and the software will be nuanced. You have a massive asymmetry of information that most of the software you're deploying is into a classified environment, where at the time, none of us had clearances. We were all wild outsiders with no knowledge of what was happening behind those, these magical doors, but just a kind of almost maniacal commitment to trying to solve the problem nonetheless.
How do you think you were so successful then? Because when I look at like Anduril, obviously we mentioned Trey beforehand. When we look at like Anduril, a lot of the success I always believed was the combination of Palmer and Trey, and actually Trey bringing a lot of the experience, probably from Palantir, of how government and selling to government works. If you were the V1, how on earth did you make it work when no one had a clue how to do it?
We're just committed to building the right product. And I don't want that to sound naive, because actually I think it took us longer and was harder because we didn't know how to sell to government. There was all these things that were kind of 0 to 1. There was no one else to really learn from. All the people who really knew it were not of the technology world and couldn't get it to work in our context anyways. So we had to kind of flail our way through feeling it out from first principles and developing a new playbook that was going to work. And I think a playbook that subsequently has been really valuable to the rest of it.
Can I ask, what is that? We're just jumping around here, but this is what I love about the show. But Trey said you literally kind of built a new business model for selling to governments and defense tech. What is that playbook?
If you were to follow, so before I tell you what the new playbook is, just understand the old playbook, right? The way the government really wants to buy everything is to pay you by the hour to build it. So some assessment of who should be doing it, but fundamentally it's a labor model. And it's a labor model where they really want, and through cost accounting and audits, will look at your actual costs. They will build in overhead rates. They will then say, this is how much profit you're allowed to have. It's kind of actually pretty communist for a country whose entire economic engine has been powered by capitalism, as a monopsonist buyer. And you can say, well, why is this? Why is it? Because it's not totally crazy. But assume you're the only buyer for a product in the world. You're the only buyer for the aircraft carrier. How should I compensate someone who's building an aircraft carrier for me? It's like, what's a fair price to pay? So the way that they solved this, really starting in the last century, was thinking about as cost plus. I don't know, it seems fair that, it costs you something, you have to pay people, you have to buy materials, and I'll give you some profit on top of that. Now, this has obvious consequences in terms of what the long-term incentives end up being. Why would you ever invest in innovation? Why would, and to the extent the government wants you to innovate, they actually pay you the money to do the R&D. You're not putting your money into it, really. You're putting their money into it. And so as the world transitioned from a place where all of the R&D was done by the government, 50s, 60s, obviously the preponderance of R&D is done by the commercial world. This model makes no sense. You really want to leverage the beauty of what we've really pioneered in the Valley is this high risk, high return approach.
Can I jump in and just ask, you mentioned that kind of, well, if you're the only buyer of said product, but I believe there's always a market. And so you could sell that aircraft to the US, but you could also sell it to the UK or to France or Germany or any others. There's probably 10 buyers, in which case, if you want the concentrated supply, well, then you can pay a premium. And then we have an efficient market. Am I wrong?
I think you're right. I think I was trying to steel man it, which is like, okay, how did we end up here? Like, let's just assume, it's Chesterton's fence. We didn't end up here because somehow the system is totally broken and incompetent. There was some thinking to it. But I think we're now in a world where the second order consequences of that system are dominating. And that's what's leading to a structural inability to innovate. Technology is supposed to make things cheaper. Somehow that doesn't happen in government. Why? And to the extent things do get cheaper, they get cheaper because they're benefiting from the massive tailwinds from the commercial market's R&D that then subsequently makes its way to government.
Sorry, is that not like anything? Is that not like anything in government though? There's no profit incentive. Why is the NHS not always looking to cost cut? Because like there's no benefits of getting rid of middle management.
And so I think the great opportunity, and really, so the playbook was, look, I'm not going to let you pay me by the hour. I'm going to refuse to accept any revenue that's services based from you. And instead, I'm going to build a product. And I'm going to keep investing in the product. And that means I have to go sell a part of my company to finance that, right? I have to go raise money to go do this. But this product's going to be so good, you're going to want to buy it. And when you're going to buy it on a license fee basis. You're going to pay some sort of subscription, software as a service. I know to the Silicon Valley listeners, this is like, obviously, what are you talking about? How is this? But there's a lot of brain damage to getting the government to this model. Even now, we've made a huge amount of headway. But the low entropy, the like lowest path, least resistance is to try to pay someone by the hour.
What was there?
And this was the point that came out in the Wall Street Journal article today. Booz Allen Hamilton and Deloitte are basically these open source software government defense tech providers that are trying to bill by the hour. Shyam had a tweet that I covered on the video today that basically said all of that is bullshit. Is like this whole pay by the hour billable stuff just because it's more open source and you think it's like cheaper. That doesn't actually work. So what he's talking about is in the origins of Palantir, we have to finance a part of the company. We have to raise capital. And from raising that capital, we use that capital to then build a product. And then we gave that product for free because we're not trying to bill you by the hour. We're not like, lawyers that are trying to get as much money out of you. We're trying to give value. And I believe if you're investing in a software company in today's economy, you got to go for value. And it seems like that's been the history of Palantir since the beginning. And AIP and boot camps is pretty much having that thesis play out again about providing value first.
Reaction. It's a big shift for them to make mentally.
One of the other complexities of government is there's a disconnect between who is the buyer exactly and who is the user. And so in the early days, and even today, the preponderance of our time is spent with the user. How do I know I'm building the right product? How do I know what I should be building next? Where is the utility? How do I get these folks who are the users to tell the buyers, no, really, this is way better? If you go to the buyers, they're going to always want to push you down to the conventional model of how do I buy this by the hour? And so I think that the way to do it is to create capability that's so compelling, so necessary, that people are willing to go through a more difficult but more rewarding process in order to acquire it.
Can I ask, on decision makers, what does the decision-making structure look like when selling to governments? Is it committees? Is it single points? Is it panels? How does that look?
It's closer to committees. I mean, it's still a Byzantine process. I'm not sure even after 18 years of doing this, could really.
That word Byzantine means intricate. It's one of my favorite words. I'm really happy you use that word. Byzantine means intricate.
Fully put it on a piece of paper and kind of tell you it out. You're kind of feeling your way through it. But people would say that you need a requirement, you need resource, i.e. money, and you need a contract. And I think at a highest level, you're trying to figure out how do you line up those three elements within the government customer you're working with to accomplish this. Now, the pathing of doing that, I think, is specific to every opportunity you're kind of going after.
So I actually spoke to many, many people before the show, as you know, and they said one of the things that you and Palantir have done so well is really just nailing the land and expand model with government contracts. What do you think has enabled you to do that so successfully? And then do you get real margin optimization? Because once you're in, it's just freaking hard to get you're retained. It's such a sticky customer.
There's two pieces to this. The first is that the land and expand doesn't work the way it does for commercial SaaS companies. What you're not trying to do is, it very much is about expanding the product surface area. So as opposed to the license surface area, or I'm trying to get more users, so it's not sales driven expansion. It's actually product driven expansion. And if you think about how do I connect up more of what this customer is doing, like I've landed with this capability. How do I expand to lateral capabilities that are valuable to them? Many of those capabilities, you're not going to think those things up in Palo Alto eating strawberries. Like you need to be in Djibouti or in Kandahar or in Balad or in Ramstein, sitting with the users to understand what's next, because that the truth is out there. It's not in some document somewhere. It's not in DC. The deep understanding of what's missing that you can build true stickiness around That's one dimension. Other dimension of this, like the reason you have to be there, is how are you to your margin optimization. It doesn't actually come from lock-in or kind of just like rent collection. It actually comes from understanding, how do I continuously productize and create the efficiency in how I deliver what I deliver. There are unique constraints in this environment, right? You don't have one big multi-tenant or three big multi-tenant geographic instances of your software that you're running on the public internet. You're delivering software into air-gapped environments that are tightly controlled and constrained, and people need clearances to access them. And so you need to have some sort of product methodology to invest in the software infrastructure. You have your software, then you have the infrastructure below that, that is essentially an army of robots that manages your software in production. Because otherwise, you're going to end up deploying a team of 20 people to go manage your software in these environments, and you're going to have a really hard time getting to scale.
Can I ask, how do you think about propensity to buy within governments? Again, you're like, what? This schedule's completely gone out the window. I'm loving this. But like propensity to buy with governments, when you compare software versus hardware, are they the same? Are mindsets the same? Or do they differ in terms of their approaches?
Yeah, the mindset is very, the whole government system is geared up to buy hardware because they kind of, especially in the US government, but I think you can see it's analogous everywhere. Living in a world where government used to finance all R&D, it starts with R&D. Okay, I'm going to pay you to do some R&D, build a prototype. If I like this thing, I'm going to procure it. I'm going to buy it at scale. Once I've procured it, I have to sustain it. So they expect costs to go like this. Of course, that's not how software works at all, right? Software, first of all, software R&D costs only increase. You know, it's not, no investor thinks Microsoft's going to spend less in the future on R&D than they spend in the present moment. That would be crazy. But the government somehow expects that to be true. And the second part is there is no difference in our modern technology world between procurement and sustainment. Like those concepts, even as I say the words, they may be like, what do you mean exactly here? You know, you're delivering software as a service. You're continuously innovating on it. It's never done. I think the government has absorbed that idea that software is never done, but they haven't absorbed the idea that means there's at least a constant cost.
Can we just hone in on one particular country, being yours? Because you said a great statement when we chatted before. You didn't expand on any of these, so thanks for the cliffhangers. They were great, like titles for a show, by the way. But I was like, okay, writing a follow-up question is interesting. America has a defense industrial problem. Why does America have a defense industrial problem? Can you help me understand this?
This is really interesting. So I'm curious. Again, I haven't watched this before. I'm curious what he thinks the challenges are in defense tech and potentially what Palantir can do to resolve those.
Yeah. Well, at the risk of making a long story long, I think you could think about, like, when were we amazing at this? And I think it was really at the dawn of World War II. And there's this great book by Arthur Herman called The Arsenal of Democracy. It's probably the book I'm most obsessed with right now, and I've read it a couple times. It really talks about how the industrial mobilization worked. We brought Bill Knudsen, a Danish immigrant who was a very senior executive at Ford and General Motors, into government. We made him from a civilian to an Army 3-star general. You know, he was commissioned as a 3-star general, and he was in charge of the industrial mobilization. And we had this immense luxury during World War II, which was that we were at peace, Britain was at war, and we were supplying Britain. We had 18 months when we were not getting shot at to turn on our industrial production, to build factories and to retool them. And that took 18 months. We needed that time. The counterfactual would have been brutal. We also needed to leverage American industry. We were at that time, we had just figured out mass production, and we, America, had just figured out mass production. It was our unique strength in the world. So we applied that mass production technique not to Model Ts, we turned it to bombers and fighters and tanks and all the machinery of war you needed to actually help the Brits go forth, and then subsequently to help America fight as well. We had these crazy founders. You know, it was Henry Kaiser. We think of Lockheed Martin, but it was Glenn Martin. It wasn't Northrop Grumman. It was Jack Northrop. You know, all of that innovation was not driven by faceless companies run by 8th generation leaders. They were built and run by these just maverick founders, people we would recognize their personality structure in the Valley today. I think as a consequence, after we won the Cold War, rightly, we expected a peace dividend. Why would you continue to? I think it's hard for a legitimate democracy to continue to sustain that level of spending in the absence of an adversary. So in 1993, the then Deputy Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, who was himself an entrepreneur, he started a Silicon Valley company called Electronic Systems Laboratories. He had what was called the Last Supper. He invited the 51 defense primes. Today we have 5. Back then we had 51. He invited the 51 defense primes in and he said, look, the budget is going to get much smaller. And it did. For every dollar they had before, they had 33 cents going forward. Not all of you are going to survive. I'm kind of giving you permission and a mandate to consolidate, to get lean, to get efficient. And so this is how we went from 51 to 5. And I think the off-sided consequence of doing this is that the industrial base became less competitive. Oh, we only have 5 people to pick among. So, prices are high or something like that. And there's some truth to that. But I think the much more profound consequence of the Last Supper is it began a deep financialization of defense. It became about dividends and buybacks and leverage ratios. It became about M&A. New venture formation was about spin-outs and mergers, not about venture-backed, creative, risk-taking ideas to go build entirely new things.
And so the financialization.
And, this is really interesting that he says this, because this is what created a lot of the, people call military industrial complex, because at that point there became a genuine profit incentive when you only got 5 companies to try to be able to take over the sector and essentially monetize what is a time of peace. And so that was definitely challenging. I'm curious to see how he thinks Palantir plays a role there circa 2003, 10 years later after 1993, when the peace dividend happened.
Was a negative thing.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because all the emphasis went away from creative, big idea. Alex Karp says this all the time. It's like no great company was created primarily to make money. Like yes, there's a consequence to that and it has to happen. But, I don't think Larry and Sergey were like, hey, how do we make money? In fact, I think they were kind of pulled kicking and screaming into that part of it. But, and so when suddenly it was very much first a business, that became quite challenging. And I think it also bred a sort of...
Now, granted, as he says this, my little pushback here is that if you're a defense contractor, you have to still make money. So he's talking about creative risk-taking and big ideas, and that went away because of the financialization of 51 to 5 contractors. But the only reason you would take a creative risk is get financed is because there has to be a profit incentive to some extent. So I get what he's saying, that they made Google because of the search engine idea, not just because of the money. But I don't know if that creative profit incentive exists, or that creative idea exists in defense venture space without the profit incentive. Now, the weird part about this is that to have a profit incentive in defense tech, you need to have a war. And so that's the complicated part here in terms of, well, if you don't have a war, where's the big idea coming from?
Dysfunction and the relationship between government and what government calls industry, a term that really we don't use anywhere else when we talk about the partners you use to solve problems. And it's that you're transactional, you're money grubbing, I am doing this mission here. I've given up a lot to work in the government. And I think, I think we can really fix that. And we have this opportunity that's happened right now because of how much interest there is in defense tech.
Just so I understand then, the problem is the mindset chasm between you're profiteering private companies and we're here for a mission of being the government. Is that the core industrial problem?
Well, I think that's a consequence of it. The core industrial problem is that we don't have a way to reward mavericks and innovators, that we've historically bred a marketplace that's driven towards conformity. We all have the same business model. We all want to get paid by the hour. Hey, I don't want to take risk because I need to know you're going to buy this government. There's no way for VC to be applied here because I can't figure out how to get to a scale of return that's going to matter.
Does that change in a time of leverage? And what I mean by that is in peace times, you're absolutely right. People can wait. They can say, I want to pay by the hour. When there is sadly conflicts around the world and you need to buy and you need to innovate and improve, you and private companies have leverage to say, align to our business model or don't buy. Does time not change that?
I'm forgetting Churchill's chief of the general staff, but he had, I think it was Fields maybe, but he had observation, which is that when you go to war, the first thing you need to do is fire all your generals. Like generals that succeed in peacetime are, and this was a general himself, right? The generals that succeed in peacetime are not the right generals to succeed in war, and vice versa. And really, what I'm saying there is something a little smaller, which is that when there is war, you do have a different sort of mobilization. You have a different sort of leadership. People are willing to make different decisions. It's almost like the only thing that works when it really matters is breaking the process and doing what's right. And the process never really works. It's kind of a digression from the main point around this. But I think you don't have leverage in the sense that, look, you're going to buy whatever model works. It's the opposite, which is the leadership says, oh, I'm willing to break the model because I see what's right. I didn't, it's not, like there wasn't a problem big enough to solve before. So I wasn't going to change how we did business. I have a problem to solve. And I, as a leader, I'm going to say, yes, this is the right path.
Can I ask, if we go back to the days of Lockheed Martin, the founders innovating there, was there a political structure that was flexible enough then to make the changes that we need to happen now?
I think there was almost a lack of political structures. There was a willingness to move fast and break things. Kelly Johnson, and when I say founder, I really mean it in the broadest sense of the word. It's almost like renegade, maverick, innovator. Kelly Johnson is one of my favorite examples of this. This is the guy who founded Skunkworks at Lockheed Martin. This guy, we would recognize him as a 100X engineer in the Valley today, right? 23 years old, joins Lockheed Martin, looks at a 2D diagram of schematics of a plane and says, this plane is fatally flawed. He goes to the senior engineer at Lockheed, and almost to get rid of Kelly, he's like, well, why don't you fix it? And of course, he fixed it. So this guy built 26 airframes in his career. Today, if you're an aerospace engineer, you're lucky to work on a third of a plane over your entire career. So you're never even going to ship a plane. And this guy shipped 26. And some of his planes, like the U-2, we still fly. He built the first U-2 in 9 months. We can do this again, right? There's a way in which we've built up so much process, so much risk aversion. In order to constrain, I think that the greatest travesty of all of this is it's like, in order to constrain the variance in outcomes, we have constrained ourselves to mediocrity. It's like we don't want projects to fail catastrophically, but that also means you can't have projects succeed catastrophically. And the amount of process we put in place just ensures mediocrity.
What worries me also is the procurement process and the tenders are so challenging that for anyone other than, I'm not picking on them, but just the most well-known, than like your Lockheed Martins, you can't engage in even the tender process because also you don't have the insurance premiums to cover some of the guarantees that are required on the directors. Only they have that large an insurance premium. And so it just means that in the end, only one or two go for them. I'm sure Palantir are now in that league, but it really is a constraint on innovation having such a stringent tender process.
I think it is. I've been thinking about this. It's dangerous to say this because if you take me too literally, it'll sound politically unpopular. But in an effort to have a perception of fair competition, we have created so much process that we neither have fair competition nor speed. And so we should really and I think if you could just juxtapose the European procurement process, which I've seen, the US process and maybe alternatives, and I'd say the European process is even more slow because there's an even greater emphasis on how do I show fairness across all of the EU states. And, and so then you could say, okay, the American process is a little more streamlined, but it still takes years. Why?
And again, the NHS got blamed for this, or Palantir got blamed for this the other day when Bloomberg reported that the NHS didn't have a fair procurement process. And they were potentially getting sued by a bunch of these other companies that, hey, you didn't do it fairly. It never ended up happening. But he is right about that. And this goes to Palantir's moat. Like, dude, once you get into the government, not only is it hard for them to leave you, it's hard for new companies to procure software. It's just not easy. It's very bureaucratic. And Palantir has been at this for 20 years. And they have a lot more experience than these other startups trying to do it.
Why do these? So we're talking about Kelly Johnson could build a plane in 9 months. We can't even procure something in twice that long. That's crazy, right? And it's not because we're not competent enough to do it. It's because we have created a structure where we do not want protests. We do not want to be blamed. We do not want to lose public trust in how these decisions are made. But I think we are retarding the growth of the human capital in government as a consequence of this. You know what? You can make mistakes. That's how you're going to learn. Yeah, no one wants to make mistakes. No one wants to be wrong. I wish we could all be right all the time. But I have screwed up so many things at this company over 18 years. And if the standard of surviving here was something like you can never be wrong, or you must optically be seen to be making every decision in a way that, you know, it will never blow back on you, like this company would not exist. I would be screwed. It's not a way to actually make the world better.
Which country has the best process, do you find? US is more streamlined than Europe. Does anyone stand out as being good?
I think the most honest answer to that question is America actually does have the best process when we're serious. When there's the political will and alignment and the problem is clear and we're ready to go, that's when we throw all the rules and the doctrine out the window and we go and we get it done. And this is kind of the Churchillian thing, right? The Americans screw everything up until they've exhausted all the options and then they do the right thing. And so that's the other part that's frustrating, is we are so clearly capable of this. I've seen it demonstrated in our greatest moments of need. But in the steady state, we reject it.
So when you put your mind to it, you can do it. You said that the DoD needs to pick a winner. How do you think about what that would look like in reality?
Oh, this is a good question, especially because Palantir wants to be the first software prime for the USG, which would be objectively, in my opinion, winning. So let's see how Shyam answers this.
Pick winners, plural, to be very clear. So I think this is one of the greatest disconnects, I'd say, between the hyper-growth technology community and DoD. So we've had roughly $100 billion of venture investment enter defense tech recently, last couple of years. And the VC model is not that everyone needs to be a mediocre outcome, right? Like I'd say the median return in a venture fund might be 0, but the average return is maybe 2, 3x, right? Like for the portfolio. And so this is the dynamics that matter, which is like, look, the peanut butter spreading, as it's kind of called. Like I have this much money and I'm going to spread it across all the companies that have come in here. That just ensures that they're all zombies. They're neither alive nor dead. It ensures that all that capital, those firms are not going to be able to raise their next round. There's not enough return. And a much better strategy is realizing, look, we need to pick a few winners and we're going to go after it with scale. And these companies are going to become large as a consequence, which then allows those funds to go bring more money and innovation in our ecosystem. And there's a virtuous cycle here, and the talent is going to stay. So maybe their one company didn't work out, but they're going to have many shots at the apple. We're going to have this ravenous new tech industrial base focused on defense problems with the capital behind it and the economics that support it. Now there's this is the part the DoD is a little uncomfortable with, which is like, well, I'd rather it's a little bit more an aesthetic towards like fair socialist returns. Like I just want to spread out the money across all of these participants so that no one's upset. But I think in reality, everyone will be upset. And if you talk to these,
it's kind of like investing in a stock. If you diversify, your returns will be incredibly average and you'll be upset. If you solidify into a couple of winners, doesn't have to be 1, 5 to 10 real winners, ideally around 5. That's real solidification. The returns are just way better.
Venture capitalists, which, you know, I'm not one of them, but if you talk to them, like, yes, I'd prefer that my companies win, but I prefer, you know, if that's not possible, someone has to win, because otherwise this market's not going to exist. And getting the Defense Department to realize, so one of the greatest lies they tell themselves is we don't pick winners. If you interact with acquisition folks, you'll get this sort of thing. Oh, we don't pick winners. But no, literally, you're a monopsonist. Every contract you award, you're picking a winner. So we have to kind of regroove how we do this to support the broader ecosystem.
I don't envy it at all. One thing I do worry about, kind of when we said about that kind of spread and the diversification, is actually the nationalization of buying, which sounds incredibly intelligent, but it's actually quite simple, really, which is just countries and kind of continents would rather buy their own suppliers' products. So Europe would rather buy a European company's product. America would rather buy an American. You know, you're not going to buy Chinese defense tech. For obvious reasons.
I think there's 2 dimensions to this. One is you don't want to be beholden to your adversaries. So that's like an obvious one I think everyone can agree to. The second dimension to this is we often forget that one of the roles of government is its economic role. You know, there's an aspect of government that is a jobs program, that is welfare for the people, and that's okay. I think where it gets tricky with defense is where that's the case and it's unacknowledged. So in the US, we have these SBIR programs, these small business innovation kind of grants or research. to a VC, this is like the kiss of death. Like research, study after study shows that you get these SBIR grants and your company never actually achieves scale. They don't really want to invest in the companies that are pursuing this. It's not a strategy to actually become a big company. It's a strategy to stay a zombie. So I think we'd be better off asking ourselves, okay, if we want the SBIR program, if we believe in small business and the aesthetic of small business, this is a type of like white collar jobs program. And that might be quite good. It's creating more STEM jobs. That's a policy question I'll leave to our policymakers. But we should not think that from this program, we're going to get massive defense innovation. We're going to get new champions. We're going to get competition. We're going to get any of the transformation that we actually need to win these next fights.
Can I ask you a bit of a direct one, which is like, I'm a venture investor for a living. The most beautiful thing in the world is when you see TAMs expanding. Uber moving from chauffeur-driven cars to the car for everyone is a beautiful and very clear example of just an expansion of TAM. When conflict arises and budgets increase significantly, as callous as it sounds, it's an expanding TAM. I said that, not you, so I can shield any problems for that.
I'd flag two things there. One is we are spending at historic lows relative to the Cold War, like as a percentage of GDP. So absolute dollars, yes, are bigger, but as a percentage of GDP, like what do you think is the defense insurance premium the country should pay every year to protect, Pax Americana and the Western international rules-based order? So policymakers can have views about that or something, but to view our budget right now,
what is it in context of GDP? 15%?
2 to 3%.
Well, basically, we're spending about 2 to 3% of GDP on actually protecting our society. I'm assuming these guys think it should be closer to 7 to 8%.
Was it in the Cold War?
At its peak, I think it's like when you look at like Vietnam, you look at other periods of the Cold War, it's like closer to 6. Yeah, 5 to 6%. So we should double check my numbers here, but let's call it roughly. It's like half of as a percent of GDP, and I think that's kind of true. And I'm not sure that it should double. That's not the point. But I think like we somehow view this in a context of like, I think we could view it as like, what is the insurance premium we're willing to pay on GDP to protect GDP?
What do you think it should be?
I think it's between where we are now and where it was during the Cold War. It's like it was absolutely right to get even though we suffered long-term consequences of the Last Supper. I don't think you could have political legitimacy without having a peace dividend after the Cold War. So I think what happened was correct, but now we should analyze what needs to happen in the context of great power competition. Like we do not live in that world anymore. It has changed radically. And we have developed some sclerotic habits of 30 years of living at, quote unquote, the end of history that we need to really shake off and organize against. And no place more so than Europe, where in many ways they've kind of forgotten they've forgotten the distant past and have enjoyed a lot of what the West collectively has been able to create.
Okay, we're going to finish the rest of it tomorrow. I'm just going to give my thoughts on what I heard today. We got about 30 minutes tomorrow, so we'll finish the rest of it tomorrow. I don't want to keep it going because they're starting a brand new topic, and I'd rather let the 30 minutes finish out tomorrow. What's really interesting about this? What's really interesting about this is Shyam's understanding of where defense tech is currently at in terms of spending in the United States. That last point they made, it was really incredible to think about. So we are spending 2 to 3% of GDP on defense, call it, protections in the United States. And that means in the Cold War era, that was closer to 5 to 6%. So we're spending half of what we were paying. Now, one could argue that we are not in as much danger as we were during the Cold War. And as a result of that, obviously, we shouldn't be spending as much as we were doing back then. That would be wasteful money. That would be money that would just be going to private contractors. That would not be an efficient use of resources, given all the problems we're seeing in healthcare, education, energy, all that stuff. It seems like Palantir has a totally different perspective, and really, it's a bit prophetic. I mean, when Karp did that interview back in 2022 with Kevin Warsh, he basically predicted the Ukraine-Russia war, right? He said there was going to be kinetic warfare. He said the world was more disjointed. He said the world was fundamentally becoming deglobalized. And then you got Israel, Hamas, Russia, Ukraine, a host of different geopolitical processes or problems. We just had airstrikes on the Houthis from the United States. Even today, we launched a bunch more. Like, We say we're not in a war with them. We're basically in a war with them now. And then you got China, Taiwan coming up. I believe the reason. So the one thing I want to say about this is that, most people that see that at face value, they're like, oh, Shyam Sankar is just greedy. Palantir is just greedy. They just want defense spending to go up so they can make a shit ton of money. And I'm sympathetic to that understanding and that argument, because if you don't know much about the company, you don't know much about defense tech, you haven't really studied the nature of what's happening right now from a geopolitical perspective, it's an easy way to make that argument. Just like a cigarette company is lobbying for, XYZ regulation so that they can make more money. I get it. But on the other side, when you really take a much bigger look at what's going on with Western values, and this is what I'm so fascinated by every single day as I study Palantir, I mean, it just fascinates me to no end, is that I think Western values are under greater attack than we've ever seen. And it's not about 2 to 3% going to 5% to protect the country. It's about what Shyam was saying, is that, do we believe in these axiomatic truths that are freedom, liberty, humanity, the pursuit of happiness, freedom of speech, right? Freedom of expression. Because if we believe in those things, NATO countries all across Europe and the United States need to vibrantly defend those. And one could argue that internally inside of our own country, we are tearing those apart. John says in the chat, we aren't in as much danger. We are in a more dangerous situation. Yeah, I would agree. Just from a pure economic perspective, we are printing money beyond comprehension. And when you print money and devalue your currency that much, that already has some implications in terms of broader freedom that you could have. So that's just from an economic perspective. Then you got the national debt, you've got internal division, you got the pseudo civil war that's going on in the United States. And then you've got our major adversaries, i.e. Russia and China, that don't want the United States to exist. That fundamentally do not believe in the Western values that we have. And, it's something that's so interesting to me as well, because I grew up when I was in high school, and I did debate in high school. I grew up around a lot of particular values that were rooted in socialism. Right. And we're rooted in this idea that there is a particular victim mentality that we should be very sympathetic to and that we should understand. And as you can see, as Shyam is saying in at the 15-minute mark of the interview, he's saying the reason why defense tech sucks is because we don't have a meritocratic process. We have this socialist agenda of how we want to spread money across a variety of vendors in the name of fair choice. The same thing that the NHS contract almost didn't go to Palantir. And the reason it almost didn't go to Palantir is because, there had to be this fair procurement process, whereas Shyam is and Palantir is dude, we're the ones that are winning. Why do we need some fair procurement process? So from that perspective, I think that Western values are under attack. They are incredibly important to protect. And tomorrow we're going to analyze the rest of the 30 minutes. We'll probably start a little earlier, probably around 7:45. So I have about 15 minutes for analysis after, and go till 8:45, go deeper and discuss it even more, because this is a very, very interesting topic. And Michael Miller says, they say China is catching up to us in AI, so we need to invest heavily to stay ahead. Yeah. There's so much stuff going on in China in regards to their fake OpenAI competitors and stuff. And they're not going to be as liberal with the technology when they get it. When they get the technology and it's at its mature rate, they're going to be a little bit more, let's just say, not nice with that tech. Carb Sarah said, couldn't said it better. All right, so we'll finish the rest of the 30 minutes tomorrow. Don't finish the 30 minutes without me, because, well, we're a cult. And we're a family, and we need to finish it together. So we stopped at the 36-minute mark, and we'll finish it tomorrow. So go do something else, but we'll finish the next 30 minutes tomorrow, and we'll recap the interview. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you guys on Finance Junkies at 9 p.m., and we'll be back for Deep Dives episode number 7 tomorrow. Have a good night, guys. Bye-bye.